It was supposed to be just another game, another night on the court, but in a split second, everything changed. One brutal collision, one star player down, and the Indiana Fever were staring at what could have been a season-ending disaster. Yet against all odds, against injury, against heartbreak, one player and one team would rise to rewrite the story. This isn't just basketball, this is survival, grit, and a comeback that will be remembered forever. On a humid August evening, inside a packed arena filled with chants, tension, and the sharp echo of sneakers screeching against polished hardwood, the Indiana Fever were preparing for a battle most expected them to lose. Their opponent, the Connecticut Sun, had a reputation not just for being one of the WNBA's toughest defensive squads, but also for playing a brand of basketball that left opponents bruised, exhausted, and sometimes broken. For the Fever, this wasn't just another regular season matchup. This was survival. They had already been stripped down by injuries, their roster stretched to the breaking point. Their rookie sensation, Caitlin Clark, was still sidelined with a lingering groin injury. Sydney Colson was lost to a torn ACL. Ari McDonald was recovering from a broken foot, and now they were entering the night without a true point guard to steer the ship. The odds felt stacked so high against them that fans feared this would be another painful reminder of how fragile Indiana's playoff hopes were. But nobody could have predicted just how chaotic, emotional, and unforgettable this night would become. By the final buzzer, the Fever would deliver not only the greatest comeback in franchise history, but one of the most resilient performances women's basketball has seen in years. Yet, the victory came at a cost that left the arena silent, teammates shaken, and fans outraged. This was the night Sophie Cunningham went down, the night Kelsey Mitchell exploded into a legend, the night Indiana proved that even when stripped to their bare bones, they refused to fold to understand the weight of this game. You have to understand what Indiana had already endured. The Fever entered the season with hope, hype, and pressure. Caitlin Clark's arrival had electrified the WNBA. Ticket sales soared, ratings climbed. The team suddenly had the eyes of the sports world watching every dribble, every play, every stumble. For a franchise that had struggled to find stability, in recent years, Clark represented more than a player. She was a spark, a promise of a brighter future. But basketball is cruel, and the Fever's season quickly turned into a test of survival. Clark's groin injury sidelined her just as she was finding rhythm. Sydney Colson's ACL tear robbed the team of a veteran presence. Ari McDonald's broken foot left a gaping hole in the rotation. By midseason, Indiana found itself stripped of playmakers, forced to rely on patchwork lineups and improvisation. Coach Stephanie White had to rebuild her offense almost weekly. Plays were simplified, rotations shuffled, and roles reassigned to players who had never been expected to shoulder that kind of responsibility. Instead of fine-tuning for the postseason like most contenders, Indiana was stuck reinventing itself just to survive each night. Still, there was something in this team's DNA that refused to give in. The Fever might not have had their full arsenal, but what they had was grit. And grit can be more dangerous than talent when desperation sharpens it. That grit was about to be tested in the cruelest way possible. It happened in an instant. One of those moments that leaves time frozen, where a crowd of thousands collectively holds its breath. Midway through the second quarter, Sophie Cunningham was battling under the rim, doing what she always does, fighting for position, hustling, for space, giving every ounce of energy to the team that had already asked too much of her. Then, in a split second, disaster struck. Bria Hartley lost her balance and came crashing directly into Cunningham's right knee. The collision was brutal, sickening even. Sophie immediately crumpled to the floor, clutching her leg, her screams echoing across the arena. The game stopped, but the whistles didn't blow. There was no foul, no acknowledgement from the officials as one of Indiana's toughest players writhed in visible agony. Teammates rushed to her side. Fans stood to their feet, shouting at the referees, waving their arms in disbelief. Even Connecticut Sun players and staff came over to check on her. The severity of the injury impossible to ignore. Sophie Cunningham has built her reputation on toughness. She plays with an edge, with grit, with the kind of determination that refuses to bow to pain. But on this night, there was no hiding it. She couldn't stand. She couldn't put weight on her leg. Trainers had to help her off the court, her face twisted in pain. The silence that followed her exit was deafening. For Indiana, losing Cunningham wasn't just losing another player. It was losing a fighter, a shooter, a leader who stretched the floor and carried herself like the heartbeat of the locker room. Already stripped thin by injuries, the Fever were now gasping for solutions. But the bigger story wasn't just the injury. It was the outrage it sparked. Fans online immediately erupted, calling out the officiating for failing to protect players. Sophie's own family spoke up, her sister publicly criticizing the league for focusing on fines instead of safety. Her mother labeled Hartley mean and out of control. These weren't casual fan comments. These were raw words from people who had just watched someone they love carried off the court, and they carried weight. For many, this wasn't just an accident. It was the latest chapter in a disturbing pattern. Caitlin Clark had already suffered a dangerous groin hit. J.C. Sheldon's infamous eye poke had sparked outrage. Marina Mabrey's reckless foul had flattened Clark earlier in the year. Each time, Indiana faced Connecticut. It seemed someone left battered, broken, or bruised. To the Fever's faithful, Cunningham's collapse wasn't an isolated moment. It was part of a growing narrative that Indiana's players weren't being protected. And yet, as devastating as that moment was, what happened next transformed despair into defiance. The arena was still buzzing after Sophie Cunningham was helped off the court, but beneath the noise was a sharp undercurrent of anger. Fans weren't just frustrated by the injury itself. They were furious at what they saw as a disturbing pattern that had been building all season. And at the center of that storm stood Caitlin Clark. Ever since her arrival in the WNBA, Clark had been the league's lightning rod. Her presence brought in new viewers, sold out arenas, and drove television ratings to record-breaking heights. But with that spotlight came a darker reality. Night after night, she absorbed punishing fouls, hard elbows, and late hits that often seemed to go unwhistled. To her supporters, it felt less like physical defense and more like targeted punishment. A message that the rookie sensation had to be toughened up. Sophie's collapse wasn't just another injury, it was another painful reminder of how physical this season had become. And as fans replayed the moment, outrage spread across social media. Some demanded accountability from the referees, others called on the league to step in and protect its players. Even those outside of Fever fandom were beginning to question whether this was basketball as usual or something more sinister. Inside the Fever huddle, the frustration boiled over. Players could be seen shaking their heads, some arguing with officials, others holding back words they desperately wanted to shout. But through the chaos, one message became clear. They would not get any favors tonight. If they were going to win, they'd have to do it the hard way. And for Kelsey Mitchell, that challenge lit a fire. The buzzer sounded, but it felt less like a break and more like a mercy call. The Fever walked into the tunnel trailing badly, heads heavy, hearts even heavier. The scoreboard told one story, but the body language told another. This was a team teetering on the edge. Inside the locker room, silence fell first, the kind of silence that weighs more than words. Sophie's injury still lingered in everyone's minds. Some players stared at the floor, others leaned back in their chairs with towels draped over their heads, trying to process what had just happened. For a moment, it looked like the season might slip away not because of skill, but because of heartbreak. Coach Christy Sides knew that silence was dangerous. A team that stays quiet at halftime of a game like this is a team ready to fold. Didn't let that silence linger long. Standing in the center, voice sharp and filled with urgency, she broke it with a fiery challenge. Nobody is going to feel sorry for us. Nobody is going to protect us. If you want this, you have to take it. The words hit like a spark in dry grass. But even sparks need fuel. And that's when the veterans stepped in. Erica Wheeler spoke up, her voice trembling with emotion. Sophie's out there hurting right now. We owe her more than this. Don't let this night end like this. AliaBoston.com, but steady, added weight to the moment. We're not leaving this room the same team we walked in. We fight. Every possession, we fight. And then, in the corner, sat Kelsey Mitchell. She hadn't spoken yet. She didn't need to. Her eyes burned with the kind of intensity that only players on the verge of something historic. Carrie Timmons glanced at her and saw not despair, but determination. In that silence, she made her promise, not with words, but with fire. When the Fever returned to the court, they weren't just playing basketball anymore. They were carrying the weight of a fallen teammate, the sting of disrespect, and the defiance of a group refusing to quit. The comeback hadn't started yet, but you could feel it building. When the third quarter began, the atmosphere in the arena felt different. The Mystics crowd confident and loud in the first half, suddenly sensed a shift. The Fever came out with a new energy, a quiet storm building in their movements. And at the center of that storm was Kelsey Mitchell. From the very first possession, it was clear this was her moment. She caught the ball on the wing, glanced at her defender, and without hesitation, drilled a three-pointer that barely brushed the net. No celebration, no smile, just a quick nod as she sprinted back on defense. That was the warning shot moments. Later, she attacked the rim with fury, absorbing contact, finishing the layup, and shouting as she hit the floor. The bench erupted. Suddenly, the Fever weren't just scoring, they were believing again. And every time Mitchell touched the ball, the crowd held its breath, sensing something extraordinary was happening. Her rhythm became unstoppable. From deep range pull-up jumpers in transition, fearless drives against bigger defenders. It didn't matter who the Mystics threw at her. Mitch answered every challenge with the precision of a surgeon and the fire of a warrior. Caitlin Clark watched with wide eyes. For months, she had carried the spotlight, the attention, the pressure. But in this moment, she understood the beauty of being a teammate, watching someone else seize the game by its throat. Clark clapped, pointed, and yelled encouragement after every bucket. This wasn't about headlines anymore. It was about survival. It was about pride. By the time the quarter ended, Mitchell had turned a hopeless deficit into a fight. The Fever's bench was standing. The fans who traveled from Indiana were roaring. And even neutral viewers knew they were witnessing something special. Mitchell wasn't just scoring points. She was rewriting the night, shot by shot, heartbeat by heartbeat, and as the final quarter loomed, one question lingered over the arena. Could she finish what she started? The scoreboard glowed like a ticking clock, each digit reminding everyone how much was at stake. The Fever, once written off as broken and beaten, were suddenly alive again. But with 10 minutes left, survival wouldn't be enough. To silence the Mystics on their own floor, they needed perfection. Every possession turned into a war. Bodies collided in the paint, arms tangled on every rebound, and the referee's whistles became almost meaningless against the sheer chaos of the moment. The players weren't just fighting for points, they were fighting for respect, for validation, for the right to be taken seriously. Kelsey Mitchell carried the offense, but the Fever's spirit became contagious. Aliyah Boston threw her body into defenders twice her size, ripping down rebounds and igniting fast breaks. Nalissa Smith battled through fatigue, hitting mid-range shots that gave her team oxygen. And from the bench, Sophie Cunningham, injured, wrapped in ice, stood and clapped, shouting encouragement despite her own pain. The Mystics, stunned by Mitchell's surge, pushed back with everything they had. Natasha Cloud orchestrated the offense with cold precision, hitting dagger threes and throwing sharp passes into the lane. Every time the Fever clawed closer, Washington found a way to stretch the lead again. The tension was unbearable. The crowd a thunderstorm of cheers and gasps. With just under 3 minutes left, the Fever trailed by 4. The arena roared as the Mystics smelled victory. But Mitchell wasn't finished. She took the inbound split, 2 defenders, and buried a contested jumper at the elbow. The deficit shrank to 2. The Fever bench erupted. Suddenly, belief wasn't just on Mitchell's shoulders, it had spread to every player, every coach, every fan watching from home. Game had transformed from a blowout into a masterpiece of willpower. And as the final minutes approached, one truth became clear. This battle wasn't about the standings anymore. It was about heart. Overtime began with the arena trembling. The scoreboard read a tie, but the energy in the Fever locker room and on the court told a different story. Fatigue had sunk into every muscle, but adrenaline and determination surged stronger. This was the culmination of a season defined by injury, adversity, and grit, a night that would be remembered not for the pain, but for how they refused to surrender. Kelsey Mitchell continued her relentless assault. Every possession she touched seemed weighted with destiny. Pull-up jumpers, step-back threes, drives through multiple defenders each play became a declaration Indiana would not be broken. And yet, it wasn't just Mitchell. Odyssey Sims, signed on a hardship contract to help patch a thin roster, ran the floor like a seasoned veteran. Her passes were precise, her defense unyielding, and her presence gave the Fever balance when chaos threatened to swallow them. Aliyah Boston, quietly dominating, recorded a double-double, her blocks and rebounds protecting the paint like a fortress. Natasha Howard absorbed punishing contact to secure points in the post. Lexie Hull, often overlooked in stats, delivered the dagger a corner 3 with under a minute left, sealing the comeback and crushing the Mystics' hopes of a counterattack. Every single contribution mattered, and together they formed a symphony of resilience, each note hitting harder than the last. The crowd, once anticipating a blowout, now rose in thunderous ovation. Fans waved banners, shouted chants, and clutched hands in disbelief at the unfolding drama. On social media, comments flooded in, praising Mitchell's historic performance and the collective grit of a team refusing to fold. Even Caitlin Clark, watching from home, posted a simple tribute. MVP Kels by the final buzzer, the scoreboard read 99-93. Indiana had clawed back from a seemingly insurmountable deficit. But more than numbers, this victory symbolized heart, courage, and unity. A team battered by injuries, playing without key stars, had found a way to rise from chaos and pain, propelled by emotion, strategy, and sheer willpower. Coach Stephanie White captured it best afterward. "We will never be counted out. No matter who's hurt, no matter the score, no matter the obstacles, we fight. Every possession, every second, every player. That's who we are." And in that moment, the Fever became more than a team. They became a story of resilience, a testament to how belief, teamwork, and determination can turn despair into triumph. Sophie Cunningham, recovering in the locker room, smiled through her pain. Her teammates, battered yet victorious, shared hugs and tears. Kelsey Mitchell, exhausted but radiant, had etched her name into franchise history with a career-high 38 points. Odyssey, Sims, Alia Boston, Lexie Hull, Natasha Howard, Brianna Turner, they were the unsung heroes of a comeback that would be remembered for decades. The night ended, but the legacy had begun. Indiana had survived the storm, proven their mettle, and reminded everyone that in sports as in life, heart often outweighs circumstance. This wasn't just a win on the scoreboard, it was a triumph of spirit. The Fever showed us what it means to fight, to rise when everything seems lost, and to never be counted out. If you felt the heart, the grit, and the comeback tonight, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a story of true resilience. Join us as we celebrate the heroes, the moments, and the unforgettable victories, because these are the games that stay with you forever.